Jamais de ma vie, j'ai tant aimé. J'étais si heureuse et si déçue. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. Jamais encore, j'ai senti la vie avec cette intensité. Et jamais de ma vie, j'ai tellement désiré de t'aimer. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. Encore une fois, à Saint-Étienne. Touche-moi, approche-toi, plus près, beaucoup plus près. Jamais encore, j'ai senti la vie avec cette intensité. Et jamais de ma vie, j'ai tellement désiré de t'aimer. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. Encore une fois. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. Encore une fois. À Saint-Étienne. Jamais de ma vie, j'ai tant aimé. J'étais si heureuse et si déçue. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. Jamais encore, j'ai senti la vie avec cette intensité. Et jamais de ma vie, j'ai tellement désiré de t'aimer. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. Touche-moi, approche-toi, plus près, beaucoup plus près. Jamais de ma vie, j'ai tellement désiré de t'aimer. Comment ce temps à Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne. À Saint-Étienne.
have I grown my lounging shoes? And I finally know now that I got to seize the day. 'Cause I'm on my way, 'cause I'm on my way.
What's next? Which steps?
I'm on my way.
What's next? Miss Appleton. Which steps will you take now? What's next? Which steps? What's next? Miss Appleton. Which steps will you take now? Now.
I'm on my way. And if I It took some time to finally figure out what I've been hiding from. Don't know which way this road will take me, though I'll stand by what I've done. But there's so much more that I can reach and do if I just take the chance. There doesn't have to be just one authentic me. What's next, Miss Appleton?
What's next? Which steps? What's next, Miss Appleton? Which steps will you take now?
So here's to one more river left to cross and breathe life into this song. Searching for words to help me to find out where I'm going. It took forever to discover that it takes more than a glance. 'Cause when I look at me, there's so much more to see. What's next, Miss Appleton?
What's next? Which steps? What's next, Miss Appleton? Which steps will you take now? Now.
I feel like I've grown my lounging shoes. And I finally know now that I got to seize the day. 'Cause I'm on my way, 'cause I'm on my way. I'm on my way.
What's next? Which steps? What's next, Miss Appleton? Which steps will you take now? What's next? Which steps? What's next, Miss Appleton? Which steps will you take now?
I feel like I've grown my lounging shoes. And I finally know now that I got to seize the day. on my way, 'cause I'm on my way. I'm on my way.
Is this working? Hello? Hello? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Manzetsa Marope, and I have the honor and privilege to chair this fantastic panel of who's who of education. Our topic is an interesting one and one that is hot on everybody's agenda. Talking about the future we don't know, but the future we must prepare for. So we are going to have on the panel Hank Levin, Aaron Benavot, Stephen Heinemann, Keith Lewin, and Nelly Stromquist. None of these people require any lengthy introduction, and since they have 10 minutes each to speak, I'd rather have them use those 10 minutes than spend it in long introductions. But I just want to highlight that the topic we are going to discuss this afternoon is one that is hot on everybody's agenda. We are in transition at the brink of the fourth industrial revolution with lots of promises of the fast speed of change that technology is going to offer us, and wondering and pondering the question we've pondered for years, whether education systems are really ready to prepare their graduates to optimally contribute to development in the fourth industrial revolution, but most importantly, whether the education systems are preparing their graduates to benefit from the development that is coming our way. Without much ado, I would call on Hank to start. Please try to keep to 10 minutes each one of you so that we can have a little bit of discussion time. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Is the system working, the sound system? I don't have to put this in my face. You can hear in the cheap seats? Good. We have to charge you more next time, okay? What I have really are some thoughts, and it was interesting to me to see the theme of the conference, problematizing, because all of us can speak for a long time on problematizing, I think. It's a little harder to talk about solutionizing, but I'm going to talk a little bit about both, but mostly about problematizing, staying with the theme of the conference. And with the theme of this group, we know that the world is changing. It's changing very rapidly in many ways, geopolitical changes, economic changes, the implications of populism, which is becoming a very powerful force around the world. And all of these have implications for not only the functioning of our educational systems, but how our educational systems should function in the future. Now, I will just talk a little bit about the economic changes, and I won't say very much about them because we really don't know. The answer is that although there are a lot of futurists out there who will tell you exactly what's going to happen, some say that there will be a shortage of jobs, others say no, because in creating the new technologies, there will be new jobs and there'll be wonderful jobs and everyone will be happy, and we just have to provide more education, of course, to make them happy so that they can fill these positions. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know. And that means that as we think about the problem, if we come up with solutions, the solutions had better be careful ones, and I'm going to suggest that we've faced this problem before in the debate between vocational education and general education. Some of you, people who are as old as I am, I know Steve Heinemann, will remember Phil Foster's, a wonderful man, the vocational fallacy, in which he argued, let's teach more general skills in preparing people for vocations and not go so narrowly, because the world is changing and people with good general skills will be able to adapt to specific training on the job that will enable them to be effective, as opposed to our training them in schools for vocations narrowly spoken. So we've been through this kind of thing before, and in most respects, Phil Foster was correct. He was prescient. But I'm also going to say, I'm going to suggest that, number one, we do need to focus very heavily on good general skills and how to apply them to changes as the changes occur. Some of that will take place in the schools, some of it is going to take place in the workplace, has to take place in the workplace, because we don't know right now what it will be, and we want to see people be able to adapt, and not only to be able to adapt in the workplace, but to be able to adapt in other roles in their lives, because hopefully adulthood is not just a workplace. Now, there are some challenges here, and this is something that I've always found in my work. Education has tensions. Let me just talk about two tensions. Education has the time-honored role of preparing people for their culture and their society. And at the same time, and this includes many of us, we view schools as the agents for change, as the agents for equity, as the agencies of good things that will happen in society, fulfilling our needs. Those two things are in tension. And what we often forget, and I wish people would use this word more, is education is a conserving force. Always has been. We want education to provide a common basis for social cohesion in our societies. We want education to contribute to stability. We can't always be at odds with each other, as is happening now in the White House and throughout the federal government. We need to work to come to conclusions that work for the society as a whole. And that means that education is a conserving force. We wish an anthropologist like my former colleague George Spindler emphasized. He taught a course called Education as Cultural Inheritance, something of that sort. We need to understand that that's an important role. It's not our enemy simply because there's continuity, stability, schools haven't changed as much as we would like them to be. That's a purpose of schools. It is a conserving and a very valuable part of education. But it is in tension with changes that need to be made. And some of the changes that we've just referred to and will be referred to here, I'm sure, there's a lot of uncertainty on what it's going to take to prepare us for the future. And we need to come to grips with that and find ways of addressing it. And my conclusion is that what we need to do is to continue to focus on general skills of thinking, of working together, collaboration, of a whole variety of approaches that make us able to cope with change, to adjust to change, while at the same time working on institutions that, as we see change, in a sense, work with those capacities that the schools and the educational system develops to adapt to useful change. Now, populism is a change. I'm not sure we want to create education that adapts to separation, to tribalism, to populism. I don't think that's the purpose of education. And what I'm emphasizing is that the conserving importance of education is a valuable thing. It is not our enemy, even though it makes it harder and harder for us to establish and cope with change. So let me just finish and say, this is the problem that we face. We want to get rapid changes in education to adapt to needs that we perceive out there, but we're dealing with an unknown future. We have to wait to see how those things develop, and some things that develop disappear. Look at Uber. Uber has a whole different approach. it's working very hard to get rid of all those drivers. The self-driving cars, it's making huge investments along with other partners to do that. So if we think in terms of the so-called gig economy, there might not be those kinds of gigs in the future. Do we really want to adapt to that over the long run, or do we want to create young people who have the ability to begin to see the way things are going and to help them adapt to those things, particularly if those things are things that are not necessarily deleterious. I don't think we should adapt to deleterious things. We should oppose those that are deleterious. But with an unknown future, we have conserving institutions. And I think we also need to understand that conserving institutions are not our enemy. We need those as the kind of foundation for a fair society, for a society where there is social cohesion, for a society where there is equity and a productive society. It's the basis that we build on in order to do the other things. So let me just stop here and thank you very, very much for listening to these thoughts, and hopefully you will have suggestions too that either agree or disagree with them. Thank you.
So thanks very much for the invitation to participate in this very interesting discussion. If I could get my PowerPoint up. I've decided to take a slightly different tact to the question posed by this particular session. And my interest is to think about as it were, the toolkit that we as comparative educationalists and others who are involved in developing education systems have at their disposal in order to affect the kinds of outcomes, be they learning related or other kinds of capacities. So I'd like to actually revisit the question of what are the goals and purposes of education very quickly. I would like to talk about the very different international milieu and environment in which education systems are now embedded, and the extent to which some of these emergent issues are being captured in the curricula and textbooks that we make available to the learners, and then some reflections to conclude. So certainly one of the key aspects that probably is universal in almost every education system is the importance of the right to education. We've now expanded that right to include both primary and secondary education. But we've also seen that education typically is seen as a means for solving problems, social, economic, political problems, and other various kinds of challenges, and then figuring out ways to translate that into the stuff of education that students experience. But I think the change that we are experiencing today is that most of the purposes and aims of education in the past were very much rooted in the national problems and national challenges that countries faced, whereas today, and certainly in the course of the last decade, increasingly international forces are having a major impact on the ways in which education systems are being organized. Certainly the integration of the global economy, the kind of competitiveness among economies, the kind of revolution in terms of information and communication technology. And again, as in the past, national problems are often solved or seen as potentially being solved through education reforms, although now, as it were, the forces that are affecting or that are being asked are much more international and global. Specifically, as my colleagues have mentioned, these are some of the challenges that we see, the erosion of state authority in the face of other very important and powerful agents, be they economic or political, the unstable labor markets that are, and much more less profitability than in the past, the kind of growing inequalities, both economic and social, that exist both within and between countries, the various financial crises, the digital divides. And I think it's important to mention that there are different sets of challenges that are often faced by countries in what we refer to as the global south, the outmigration of skilled labor, the kind of economic fallout and political fallout of the dissolution of former colonial empires, the need to promote tolerance and understanding in societies that are often extremely diverse, multilingual, multicultural, multi-ethnic, the high and almost chronic unemployment or underemployment, and again, inequalities, and in some parts of the world, very high fertility rates producing youth bulges. So a very important study for us to look at has actually been produced by the IBE that compared the aims and purposes of educations that countries articulated in the reports that they submitted to the International Conference of Education over the period of many years. And it's interesting to see when you analyze these aims and purposes, the extent to which they have changed over time. And this was looking at the change between the 1980s and the 2000s. And basically, the analysis formulated 23 different educational goals that were found in these different reports, such as education as a human right, education as being something to help develop an individual's skills and capabilities, enhancing personal and emotional development, and so on. You can also see some of the more social and national purposes that are listed here in this particular slide, things to do with civic values, promoting a sense of justice, and indeed things to do with sustainability and environmental awareness, and also economic growth. So what do we see? We can take these 23 goals and maybe organize them into 4 large categories that have to do with human right, that have to do with an economic-oriented set of goals, that have to do with individual self-development, and then strengthening human development and human society. The main findings from this study basically show that over time, the explicit statements that countries make as to their purposes and aims has actually become much more similar. There's some set of convergences, or isomorphism, if you wish, among the ways in which they are articulated and seen between the 1980s, the latter part of the 20th century, and the beginning of the 21st century. However, there are also very important historical and cultural variations, such as the importance of religious identity among the Arab states, or issues around citizenship and national civic identity in many of the countries that are referred to as transition countries. And indeed, there seems to be this kind of emergent global ideology that has these 3 components. So now moving to the discourse at the global level, which I think is also affecting the ways in which countries organize their systems of education. We've moved from the EFA 6 targets and goals to this new period of the SDGs, in which now education is embedded within this broader development discourse. It is now part of a component of peace, or people, I should say. And as most of us are aware, there are 10 targets, 7 targets and 3 means of implementation that are being operationalized in various kinds of ways. And without going into all the details of what we find in these targets, I think the key point to be made here is that we have a very expansive educational agenda, enormously ambitious, much more comprehensive. It is a universal agenda, and it puts a huge emphasis on issues to do with equity and also the life course. Now, the question then becomes, to what extent are these new commitments that countries have made are being taken up and being, as it were, adapted and operationalized in the nitty-gritty of what students experience in the classroom. The one thing I would just bring to our attention before I move to that point is that one of the interesting things about the new agenda is that most of us are aware of the first article or the first paragraph in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is now more than 60, 70 years old, that it basically talks about the right to education and fundamental education, which makes reference to adult literacy. But the second paragraph is in many ways what is being captured in the new agenda, especially issues to do with human personality, the promotion of understanding, tolerance, friendship among nations, religious groups, and whatnot. So it is in Target 4.7 that I went over very quickly that speaks to issues of gender equality, human rights, global citizenship, sustainability, that often is in some ways coming full circle to this one paragraph of the UNHCR that often we forget. So moving to then the contents of education, certainly I don't have to impress upon anybody in this room, and certainly not Mrs. Merope, who heads a very important institute around the curriculum, just how central curricular materials are in translating the goals and purposes and the broader set of emergent categories at the global level to the stuff of textbooks and pedagogy and actual practices in the classroom. And it is in that planned, sequential set of experiences that really what matters occurs. And so the question then becomes, to what extent are curricular materials, textbooks, actually undergoing any radical change in light of international factors and some of the points that I've made? And I know that I'm running out of time here, so I'll move very quickly. What we see, and I know it's difficult within this particular slide, is that many of the issues that capture the social, humanistic, and moral purposes of education, as seen in Target 4.7, are only minimally embedded in current curricular materials, whether it be the official curricular policies that countries articulate at the primary or the secondary level, or in, as it were, in the textbooks that we've also looked at, in which only a minimum number of some of the key issues around global citizenship and environmental sustainability and some of the other key issues are being embedded. So I guess the point that I wish to make here, and in that I will close, is that in some ways we have a new agenda that opens up a very interesting window of opportunity to rethink and revisit the basic purposes and goals of education. And it provides countries and many different groups within countries a basis for articulating new changes and reforms, especially in the contents of schooling. But the tensions here are enormous, some of which Hank has referred to, about how to bring about the kind of significant change in the contents that would, as it were, articulate the changing international environment in which countries are now found. Thank you very much.
So, good afternoon, and I have two things to mention before I talk about my presentation. First is if I hear a song coming from Professor Merope's phone, I'll sit down. It's a sign that we're through. Secondly, I'm not going to repeat what Hank Levin or Aaron said. I only want to mention that I agree with it. I'm particularly happy that Hank went into some detail about the conserving role of schools and the importance of articulating the role of schools in social cohesion. I'm not going to talk about a normative issue about what ought to happen. I'm going to try and say what is going to happen to curriculum, regardless of whether we want it to happen or not. It's going to happen. And secondly, at the very end, I'll say one or two things about what governments will have to do to respond. So, in terms of employment, none of us in the future will have a single career. All children in rich and poor countries will go through more than one career in their life, and it will not be planned, and it will not be predicted. And then often, those careers will shift over time with people living longer. Careers often occur after retirement. Hello, it happens. Also, multiple sources of income are going to become the norm because, in many instances, a single source of employment will not put enough bread on the table. So you will have to have more than one source of income, including not only families, but individuals within families. So you may be, they may be seasonal. Some of it may be associated with what is now a hobby, but could become a source of income. But the old paradigm of a single career and a single paycheck to put bread on the table for a family, that's over. Delivery mechanisms of curriculum are shifting rapidly. The sequence of presentation and acquisition are no longer based on age or simplicity, but rather on experience and speed. The old idea that, well, you should introduce chemistry at this age and physics at that age are breaking down, that some parts of vocational education or job skills should come first. I remember when typing was a job skill, and now it's a requirement to get through elementary school. You can't proceed unless you know how to use what is a keyboard. Media. Be multiple sources of media and multiple combinations and rapidly shifting. What's the biggest curriculum developer in the world today? YouTube. Because if you've downloaded how to do it from YouTube and put them together in any creative way, there's not a subject in the world you can't illustrate rather well. And that's just an illustration of the kinds of sources that will be used, whether we like it or not. We used to worry, we have always had to worry about opportunity cost in education. That is to say, the principle being that the younger a student, the younger a person, the lower the opportunity cost. But now, with new life cycles, the opportunity cost changes. It changes with age. The opportunity cost for teaching me something is rather low because I don't have a full-time employment. And that's true with all people who are in retirement age, but because the media is so easy to acquire and to administer, the opportunity cost of learning new skills is completely different from what it was 20 years ago. State authorities, some of us in this room may not agree with this at all, may not like it, but it's going to happen anyway. State authorities as producers of curriculum are no longer viable. Any Ministry of Education that is producing curriculum is out of date. It should get out of the business. In a minute, I'll tell you what I think ministries of education should be doing. And this goes for UNESCO, too, by the way. No UNESCO agency should be producing curriculum. Challenges. No longer, lack of information always used to be our biggest challenge. That's no longer the case. Information is readily available. I just got back from Malawi. And in Malawi, they have in some parts of Malawi, and some people, they have as much information as I would have at Vanderbilt. So lack of information is not, and the amount of information that's available there's a plethora. The problem is not that. The problem is to identify trustworthy sources of information, to find out which sources of information you can trust. That's a major challenge, and that is a challenge now to the education systems. We have to reinstill a sense of choice and priority. Licensing authority. Used to have monopolies in who can be a plumber, who can be a pilot, who can be a nurse. They no longer can be monopolized. They're now shifting to multiple licensing sources and often from global suppliers. If you want to be a nurse and you want to work in the Philippines or in Jamaica as a nurse, you've got to adhere to global standards of nursing, not just Jamaican standards, because they have tourists who come and they expect a global sense of, same with pilots. If you're a welder and you're producing welding for a new soccer stadium in Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi standards are not necessarily the ones you adhere to. You have to adhere to global standards, and those are competitively supplied. The nature of professionalism is completely being redefined with all of the changes in both in sources of curriculum and in methods of obtaining those skills. Quality gap between rich and poor countries. As I say, I just returned from Malawi, and in some parts of Malawi, the quality gap is narrowed considerably. And in other parts of Malawi, it's increased, so that there are certain people in certain hotels and in certain businesses that have access to the kind of information and technologies that you might have in Pennsylvania. But 10 minutes away, and they're still using hose to produce maize the way they were 50 years ago. So it's a mix. You can't simply say that developing countries are falling behind or they're catching up. It's both. New roles for the state. The state should be involved in licensing the licensing mechanisms so that they keep a track of those organizations and institutions that are offering licenses. And it's true for higher education, and it's true for technical skills, and it's true for media development. The role of the state, they should now suggest standards of excellence based on performance expectations and not content. This is why I say government should get out of making curriculum, that they shouldn't get out of setting performance standards. Here's what the architect is expected to accomplish. Here's what the pilot is expected to understand. Rigorous enforcement here of the mechanism to control fraud. Fraud is a big problem. It's a global problem. And so is corruption of standards. And so governments have a new role, an important role, in curriculum in controlling that. Thank you.
Whilst we're waiting for this presentation, you might like to talk to the person next to you, just for 1 minute, about what you've just heard. Then we'll find out if you're asleep. 1 minute. Say something. New pedagogy, it's called talking. Okay, well, I see some of you woke up, but maybe the rest didn't. We'll keep trying. Now, it's always a pleasure to listen to these people, and I'm pleased to say I still learned something from it, and I hope you'll at least be provoked by what I'm going to say for the next 10 minutes to question some of the things you may be thinking about future competencies that have an impact on learning and development. We have a window of opportunity to do things a little differently. People of my age have been tracking this story from the 1970s or even the 1960s. and seeing various things replicate themselves, various triumphs and various disappointments. Let's try and minimize the disappointments and maximize the triumphs. When I was thinking about this, I thought, there's something wrong with this. I've been asked to be on a panel about the future where the average age is over 65. It's not my future, it's yours, so I can say anything. You're the ones that should worry. I think there are three opportunities. We can build on what we already know, and we should never dismiss the value of accumulated wisdom. The history of civilization is exactly that. It's about the ability to accumulate and progress rather than keep forgetting and reinventing. I think we have an opportunity with the SDGs to do what it says on the tin, but we are not doing it. I've already listened to many presentations around the conference today that relate to the SDGs. I don't hear anything that was different in those presentations if I had said, no, it's not the SDGs, it's the MDGs. Where's the sustainability aspect to this discourse about curriculum, about financing, about participation, and so on and so on? I don't hear it. I don't see people redefining what we mean by sustainability. And again, I thought, well, you're only going to give me, I thought it was 15 minutes, so we're in trouble here. When I was thinking about it, if I have to say one thing, what is it? Well, I think it echoes actually what Steve just said. There is one thing about an education fit for purpose in the 21st century that everybody must have, and that is the ability to detect bullshit. It's the ability to say, I hear what you say, and unless you've got any evidence that's plausible, I don't believe it. And we see this in our political system in the UK, and I think you just might see it in the USA. Right, my 10 minutes starts here. Those of you who were with us last year saw me present this slide. It is what it says it is. It's obviously China. But you can't see China, which is a bit of a problem. There is what is called a big brown cloud. That's the Bay of Bengal. That's India. It's not the same cloud. It's another one. Something changed between this year and last year. I'll tell you what it was. Last year, Beijing had the highest level of particulate pollution on the planet. This year, Delhi did. In India, it's estimated that well over 1 million people will die of aspiratory diseases related to this cloud. Everybody should know that. Everybody should act in ways which reduce the probability that you won't be here. I won't be here anyway. But if you're young, you're heading for a premature demise if you don't get on top of that. And that has something to say to what we teach our kids, the next generation. Now, if I take you backwards, I say, you heard about Piaget? Anybody in the room? Yeah, can you name all the stages? Oh, shaking heads, oh, difficult, okay. How do you write a curriculum then? How do you write a test if you're a teacher? I don't know. Piaget was pretty good, most people think. Don't forget him. Somebody called Ronald Gagné, probably less known, but some people in the room will know Gagné. Came up with a schema of learning domains. Bloom's taxonomy. Do you know it? Can you run it through? Jolly good. You're one of mine. Very useful. It's generations of teachers throughout the world have found this, practically speaking, pretty damn useful. Multiple intelligences. How many? How many are there? All right, your price for started for 10. There you are, there's 8 of them. You should know that. It's a very good schema. All those are good in their different ways, and they inform teaching and learning. Do you know this one? Can you name the 6 elements? I think not as many people can. Is this going to last as long as Piaget and Bloom? Is it as useful? I don't know. I'll leave that one on the table. You're shaking your head, Dan. Right. Many critiques. But that's a current model that's being used to inform the development of global metrics. It's a bit worrying because it doesn't seem to build on all the other ones I just mentioned. What's the connection between them? I don't know. Right. Time is passing very quickly. I came across this my colleague Michael Fullen. I don't work directly with him. I was at a conference with him. And he told me about deep learning competencies, 6 of them, the 6 C's. He said there are 1,000 schools doing this, and so on and so on. I said, what are they? He said, well, there it is: collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, citizenship, character, communication. I said, John Dewey. I went back and read John Dewey yesterday. I think you'll find most of that in Dewey's writings, and a whole bunch of other people I could name. I'm not sure where this is leading us. Is deep learning really new? I don't think those things are new. Character education, citizenship, communication. This is the stuff of a 19th century liberal arts curriculum, isn't it? Maybe its execution is different, I don't know. And of course, there may be some information technology in there. But if you can name a 21st century skill that's not a 20th century skill, I've still got a $100 prize available. It's in my pocket. Nobody's won it yet. You've got another 5 minutes to win it. So one thing I've been talking about, and I talked about last year, and I'm saying it again because I think it is still the same question. How would you know sustainable development and sustainable educational development when you saw it? And how would you know education for sustainable development, which is something different? Both those things are very important. But what are they? How do they materialize? How can you convert this into a curriculum or a new approach to pedagogy? Because that surely is one of the questions of SDG 4, the one on education. How do you practically answer that? Is sustainability about valuing the future over the present? I think it is. It is about a discount rate. I was struck by what Steve said about opportunity cost. Absolutely, you should value the learning of children over the learning of adults. Sustainability, in the words of Nick Stern, very famous global report on environmental sustainability, says it's all about the discount rate. It's about valuing in the future your national parks more than you do today, so you don't destroy them. And I think you can take the same view of education. Maybe it's about ensuring technological innovation increases such that productivity exceeds the rate of population growth. That's essential. If that doesn't happen, people will get poorer. But what does it mean in practice? Is it about energy? Well, yes, it is. The difference between rich and poor people is the energy they consume. And it's not that the problem is the energy we produce is filthy. It's not that we produce too much of it. We should produce more, and everybody should have access to it. Right. So I had a set of questions, which you'll find on my website, which I think should inform this debate about sustainable development issues. And I think we probably don't have time to get into them in any detail, but it is essentially the question I started with, which is, what are you going to do different in a sustainable development world, educationally speaking, that you hadn't done in a non-sustainable world, if that's where you came from? Now, these 21st century challenges, the big thing I said, I thought if you asked me to pick one thing, it's about the ability to have an internal quality assurance mechanism. That's what we should teach people. It's about the difference between fact and opinion, about fake news and real news, about deep learning and the big data systems that allow you to find out what influences people and invite those people who run the big data analytic systems to cause you to behave in particular ways. Make no mistake that that is what is happening. It's about understanding behavior in order to predict it. And then, from marketing to politics to other things you may mention, about determining behavior. Okay, well, you want me to go, but I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Do you want me to stop here, or do you want me to say something about this man? If you read the Nobel Prize winner Kahneman on this subject, he talks about what you see is all there is, and type 1 and type 2 thinking. What you've just experienced is type 1. You looked at a face and you made all sorts of assumptions about what that man, who he is, what he's thinking, what kind of guy is he. But if I'd shown you that picture, you'd have made different assumptions. And if I'd shown you that picture, you'd have made still more different assumptions. The one I showed you first will color how you see the person you're looking at, as of course would that. That's type 1 thinking. Everybody should be aware of this. This is type 2 thinking. This was in the Finance Commission report. It says employers are increasingly demanding social and non-cognitive skills, as well as high-level thinking and technical skills. You can't read that chart in the same way. You actually have to read it, and if you read it, you will recognize that applied globally, it's bullshit. It's absolutely the wrong basis on which to proceed, and everybody should have that skill. Well, I appreciate I'm testing everybody's patience. So I will finish with this slide. I say back to the future. I did this about 35 years ago or something, when it was fashionable to talk about Fordism and post-Fordism in educational analogy terms. Standardized products, differentiated products. Supply pushed, boo. Demand pulled, rah, rah, rah. Learner contribution minimized, old style, old-fashioned, get rid of it. Learner contribution maximized. Individual sporadic innovation, build innovation into what you're doing. Quality control at output, quality control at input, internal. That's really my point. Quality control at input is the sort of thing that everybody has to possess. I think if you look at that left-hand list and you look at the global metrics movement, we are going back to standardized products, supply pushed, learner contribution minimized, individual sporadic innovation, and quality control at output. That's going backwards, that's not going forwards. I think we should go forwards. Thank you very much for listening.
Excuse me, I don't have that. Good afternoon. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Marope, thank you very much for inviting me to join this panel. I would like to begin over there, thank you. This is my beginning premise. Are we really facing an unknown century, or can we shape it, right? I would like to begin with a quote by President Abraham Lincoln, who said the best way to predict the future, your future, is to shape it, right? So I share his view. And I would argue that we as human beings play a key role in determining our future. So it's not just our fate, our unknown fate, but what we make of our daily life through large and small events. In recent decades, the world has made powerful leaps in technology. Not only in ICTs, but also in medicine, transportation, agriculture, world technologies. Much less progress has taken place in terms of humanistic development. Much less progress has taken place in coming to terms with the frail nature of the human condition. I don't like the present, characterized by greed, competition, conflict, feelings of superiority among industrialized countries, and much too often feelings of exceptionalism. Therefore, I would like to work for a different future, one in which harmony prevails over conflict, where widespread well-being is more important than immense wealth, where empathy is greater than self-aggrandizement, and where global concerns indeed receive much more attention than narrow national interest. In this context, I see it as essential to put less emphasis on technical competencies and to inculcate the value of conviviality. The inordinate amount of attention to subjects such as reading, math, and science tend to crowd out humanistic disciplines such as history and philosophy. We now talk a great deal about sustainability, but I would assert that more than sustainability of what we have to reshape our present and future. Developing countries have large numbers of people with poor basic skills in reading and math. And this is a situation that indeed must improve. But in the struggle for progress, we're moving into paths that are narrowing the curriculum enormously and redefining knowledge in less than desirable ways. Since most measures of knowledge seek global and regional comparisons, knowledge is being redefined to mean performance in standardized tests. These tests, by design, are limited in time, which is, of course, not the case for graduate education, and I don't see why that knowledge would have to be measured in different ways. And in the knowledge measure, the tests are based on items that discriminate among test takers and on items in which one and only one single answer is correct. Standardized tests, therefore, make our knowledge black and white, with no possibilities of grayness, something that contradicts our own experience. In many venues, there is a constant invocation of the knowledge society. But if you scratch underneath this mantra, what you get is priority to science and technology. As I have said earlier, there are wonderful scientific and technological inventions and innovations. Yet, there has been a substantial growth in internal and external conflict in the world. What knowledge have we developed to address these problems? What knowledge are we fostering to widen the social and cultural minds of our students? Very little. We live in a world facing serious contradictions. We proclaim the value of social equity, yet we are committed to market-driven reforms. We want peace, yet keep on arming ourselves with the latest war technologies. Allow me to give you an example on the question of gender. When paying attention to gender, global policies in education, currently SDG number 4, emphasize access, completion, and learning. Yet, schools keep on maintaining a culture of silence. Freire was quite correct when he spoke about the culture of silence. Regarding culture of science regarding key manifestations of gender asymmetries. Past a brief and superficial reference to sex education course, if such is given, there's no discussion of constraining forms of violence, such as rape, sexual violence, domestic violence, sexual harassment, FGM, and honor crimes. The role of the sexual division of labor in shaping female and male identities, and the weight of materials inequalities affecting women, such as access to credit, inheritance law, divorce norms, are simply not discussed in schools. These competencies would fall under the rubric of fundamental life skills. Those remain underdeveloped. To create a just world, we have to form youth and citizens who are fair, participatory, self-reflective. These are competencies we need to foster today, not tomorrow. The World Bank is solidifying its position as the main development agency, who is identifying its position as the main development agency, identifies as its key objectives the elimination of poverty and the promotion of shared prosperity. How can these objectives be attained in the absence of respect and empathy for others, in the absence of values that promote less individualism and less competition? A philosopher and sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, observed that education, to create genuine empowerment, should not simply allow us to play the game that others have designed for us, but to enable us to have the influence to change the game's objectives, stakes, and rules. And he said, this is not just about personal, but also social skills. And to me, this is very important. Now, not everything is dismal, however. A policy paper on textbooks produced by UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report last year indicates that some progress is taking place based on a review of 500 secondary school textbooks in 76 countries. The policy paper reported that while reference to global citizenship appeared only in 13% of the books in the 1980s, by 2008, it appeared in 25 of the textbooks. There have also been increases when referring to human rights, from 28% of the textbook doing so in the late 1970s to 50% by 2011. On the other hand, only 10% of the books address the question today of conflict prevention. The UNESCO report recommended that values such as global awareness, social, civic, and moral responsibility be included in textbooks. Now, it should be noted that while target 4.7 of the SDGs, and I'm taking the SDGs seriously, as opposed to something that would be only symbolic in nature, target 4.7 of the SDGs refers to humanities and moral purposes of education indirectly, as it addresses the need to mainstream in the curriculum global citizen education, including gender equality and human rights. At the same time, and I think that a target can only be good as the indicators that are developed for it exist. At the same time, the expert group working on indicators to measure this particular target has stated that no metadata has received to work on the indicator formulation for these targets. Furthermore, what I should say is that those who are working closely on 4.7 have indicated that very little support, financial support, exists for this particular target, which means that it will not be covered in future reports and likely then not implemented. In closing, I would like to make a plea for considering educational competencies to go beyond instrumental values and to create competencies that in turn or instead endow us with the knowledge, attitudes, and values to create a better world for all. Thank you.
Thanks to all the panelists, and especially for keeping time. It's very hard to say all the good things you wanted to say in 10 minutes, but you all did. I'm not going to summarize the presentations because I know that you've been listening very carefully and taking notes. But I just want to highlight a few messages, starting with Hank's first presentation, which starts by signaling to us that yes, the world is changing fast and will change faster, but let's be cautious about what we don't know. And when we prepare for what we don't know, maybe focus more on transferable skills that people get from good quality general education. He also highlights the tensions, what he calls tensions, and they're also mentioned by Stephen, between the core mandate of education, which is to produce people who can learn and who can learn through life, and the instrumentalist value of education, which is to respond to a whole range of challenges and opportunities. I don't know if I would call these tensions, or maybe to me it's a matter of balance, because we cannot say that education should be irrelevant to what's happening in its environment, but at the same time, that responsiveness has to be tempered with ability to be a lifelong learner, and that comes from the core basics or core basic mandate of education. there's also underscoring the importance of adaptability, which actually comes from being an effective lifelong learner. Because whatever changes in the environment, if you can learn and retool yourself, you will be able to adapt. So this really underscores SDG 4 in its totality, which emphasizes equity of education quality for all. There has been also a key message in the presentation about the centrality of curriculum. How does curriculum respond to what education should be tackling in way of responsiveness to the contextual changes? And then again, an interesting point that states and UNESCO shouldn't be involved in developing curriculum. They should be forming regulatory environments and so on. But the question is, who would develop the curriculum? Perhaps you too. But going back into the curriculum, there has also been caution about the credibility of information if we are going to rely on the multiplicity of sources of information, which can also be a basis for educating ourselves. Let's pay attention to the credibility of that information, with Keith Lewin also having a very colorful way of characterizing this credibility. But I won't repeat it. I think we all heard it. There's been caution also about the changing of future jobs. What are these future jobs? We know the jobs will change. We know people will have multiple careers, and Stephen says even multiple sources of income. But we don't know in which direction. But at the same time, I think we have some educated guesses, the direction of the changes of these jobs. So, what will the future look like? If we say we don't know, then what should education systems be doing? Or should they wait? I think there was one of the presenters who said we should wait to see what the future will be. But do we even have the leisure to wait? And if we wait in a rapidly changing environment, are education systems really just about playing catch up? And again, Hank started with this. Yes, education systems should respond to change, but we should not be too nervous about conserving institutions, as he put it. So we do need anchors. And someone else also, Keith Lewin, took us to our basic education lessons and all those nice taxonomies. I couldn't recite any of them anymore, but I do remember the labels. But are we really at a point where we can repeat Koyan and say that the more things change, the more they stay the same in education? Or are we at the brink of volatile and dramatic change that we can't really just say the more things change, the more they stay the same? I'd like to stop there and open the floor for a discussion of what were a set of very interesting presentations, in my view. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Yes, please. Please. We finally have a mic that moves.
So I am Shinapa from the Stockholm University, Sweden, former UNESCO. So I just I'm so pleased to hear these great colleagues speaking about the futures, but I'm here in the place of Martin Luther King. So I flew from Sweden specially to pay tribute to this great guy. And one of the SDGs, number 4, there's a term called inclusiveness. And that's what I am so much concerned today. When I heard about Bloom, when I heard about Piaget, but I did not hear about Comenius, I did not hear about Vivekananda. I did not hear about a lot of great people who have, in a way, contributed to education. No, Kit, I'm not, I'm just, I want to say something because that is for me very important. Right, my point is that, should we also not go back, not to reinvent the wheel, but try to find what are the gaps that we have not been looking at when we talk about lifelong employability, for example? There's a lot of things that we need to think of for the future, but not to do business as usual. That is my main comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment and perhaps a question about what you were saying, Professor Heinemann, about the future prospects for employment. And you talked about the sort of flexion and the idea that they would have to have multiple jobs and multiple sources of income. And the thing that struck me was what you were describing is what immigrant communities have faced for generations. There are lots of people who've had that experience for a very long time. And I was thinking in looking at ways in which people adapt to that. There are many examples that are surrounding us in this very city where I think comparative educational researchers could learn a lot.
Questions and then turn to the panelists. Renato.
Can I ask?
No. Stephen, I'm chairing the meeting over there. Renato.
Just a comment, a very, very short comment. Maybe the new agenda of education that the panel has addressed and Mrs. Marope has made a summary, it's not about inventing concepts. It's not about new concepts, but trying to give new meaning to concepts that we have for 40 or 50 years. I mean, the concept of equity, the concept of inclusion, the concept of quality. I think that the new agenda that Education 2030 is not about new concepts. It's about giving a renewed meaning to core conceptualization that have framed the discussion about education in the last 40 or 50 years. Equity, quality, inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm also going to ask a question.
Then, thank you.
It's okay.
Well, thank you, Mansetsa, and thank you, the panelists. It's such a diversity of perspectives is really impressive. What struck me was that the topic of learning and competencies in some ways runs parallel to what we all think about in terms of international development, that we can look at things as if the world is getting to be a better place. The absolute poverty levels have gone down across the world, but we could also look at it in terms of the Gini coefficient, where the gaps between the rich and the poor have increased in most countries. Learning in some ways strikes me to be very similar, and I'm wondering how it fits with the panelists' view. What I see is my colleagues in OECD and Educational Testing Service and so on talking about 21st century skills. And at the other hand, we hear people talking about, like with the AGRA studies, that people can't read a single word after 2 or 3 years of school. So the relative gaps are going up. And in spite of Steve Heinemann's accurate comment that, you know, people have a world of information at their fingertips, if they can't read, then they don't have that. So this absolute and relative piece seems to me to be very, very timely, and I wonder if anybody has a comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The lady over here. Yes, please. And then I'll have the panelists respond.
Thank you. Actually, specifically for Kurt, because you mentioned Piaget and his stages, you mentioned multiple intelligences, and I noted that you did not mention anything about working memory, or implicit memory, or the concatenation of basic skills needed to automatize and instantly reproduce competencies that everyone talks about, or the consolidation schedules that so much of the cognitive neuroscience has been optimizing. The question for you and for everyone else is, how can the international education community update the knowledge about learning that dates from the mid-20th century? And I'm serious about that question, because people don't study that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the panelists to respond to some of the questions and comments, and in any order, so any one of you who wants to respond can take whatever question or comment, and then we'll take another round of questions. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. I would like to respond to the comment that Renato made, right? And he said, it's not a question of inventing new concepts, but revitalizing the existing ones. I wish that was what I would see, right? But that's not what I'm seeing today. Especially when talking about gender, they continue to talk about access, completion, and learning. But this reconceptualization of gender as an issue to be addressed in the goal is missing, right? The question then is how people who want some proactive action can influence international agencies all the way from UNESCO to the World Bank, so that in fact these new concepts or old concepts are expanded, refined, and based on a theoretical framework. To me, this is a very difficult struggle, and here I wish more progress would take place.
Could you pass the mic to Heinemann, please? Oh, there's another one. Yes, please. I think you should just respond freely.
Thank you for your comment, and also Dan. This one worked better, I think. Okay, thank you. Dan, you're right. 30 years ago, I began trying to get the World Bank interested in textbooks, which they did, on the grounds that it's easier to teach reading when you had something to read. It took the bank a long time to learn that, frankly, but they did, and that remains true. And there's been no revolution in information availability in rural primary schools in Malawi. I can tell you that. You're dead right. So the point I was trying to make is that every country, including Malawi, Nepal, every country, there are pockets within there where information, the difference between availability of information in that pocket and elsewhere in the world has been reduced. So it's inconsistent. You can't simply say it's unidimensional. Now, if I understood your question correctly, about how children learn, and those who, I think the biggest indicator of school quality today, certainly of university quality, is broadband. The level of broadband available in a university is one indicator of the degree of its quality. I would also make the same characterization of quality of the education at K through 12. That is to say, the higher the level of broadband available, either through public or private sources, and the level of equity of that availability, the higher the quality of it. And the reason is because kids all over the world, including children right here in the city, get ahead of curriculum developers when it comes to accessing information. Okay, that's putting things mildly. And so I think the best way, the most efficient way we can help educate in the future in terms of providing curriculum is to guide that process, to teach them to tell the difference between trustworthy sources of information and not to put sources of information together in new and creative ways, and so to attain the standards, the standards that we as a society would want to set.
So I'm going to reflect a little bit on my colleagues, and in particular Steve's point. I actually don't think that the future of the world is broadband. I believe that the digital divides that exist today are going to be reproduced, at least for the next 20, 30, 50 years. These digital divides are enormous. and I do not see broadband or technology-driven change in education systems affecting the vast majority of learners, certainly adults, and those who have left school, to say nothing of those who are in school. And so for me, then, I think that the point that was made that I think is really interesting is the changing role of the state as an arbiter of both content and allocation mechanisms and credentialing and even the legitimation of sources of power and authority in society. And to the extent that the role of the ministries of education or the nation state is being undermined in part due to all kinds of external sources of power and influence, this I think is actually where kind of the interesting change occurs. And so I think that here we have to kind of ask ourselves the question, so if the state is not, if the nation state, the ministries of education are not the arbiters, is it the market, as some have claimed? Is it some other sources of information, corporate, civil society, that gain a voice in these matters? What ends up becoming the role of the teacher in this? Because much of the imagery that many of my colleagues gave is one of continuous self-learning, of essentially, if you have a YouTube or it's a question of what things you choose, what sources of information you choose in order to learn and then learn throughout the life course. So there's no teachers. There are no people who are in positions of reflecting, as it were, the power and authority of society anymore. And teachers become, as it were, superfluous. And is that really the vision that we have?
Could you put up the slide in a moment? While they're doing that, I think very interesting questions. I'll just respond to two of them. Helen, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is an enormous amount of accumulative knowledge about how children learn and how brains work, or at least how we think they might work, which we have to build on. But we live in a period of worlds in collision on this subject, I think. There's what you know, and you've studied it for a long time. I'm reminded of the teacher prize, the $1 million best teacher prize. You think, well, it'd be really interesting if that was underpinned by some neuroscience, but I don't think it is. I think it's just, we look at somebody and we think, oh, that's great. Sounds good. It's a performance art. But we're not really in a position to transmit it or to share it because we have no theory. Well, I think maybe you get my point, maybe you don't. But it is worlds in collision. The type 1, the type 2 thinking. The imagery of a wall, I'm on risky territory here, suggests that whoever's been talking about a wall on the Mexican border recently didn't learn from the first emperor of China, who built the largest wall in the world. But he didn't keep anybody out. All walls have ends, and you go around the end of them. We've got different ways of thinking which are in competition with each other. But in response to what Dan was saying, I think there was a very serious issue. I used to spend most of my life worrying about why it was that we couldn't reduce the differences in cognitive capability between the top and the bottom, between the rich countries and the poor countries, and all that stuff. I'm now worried about the cognitive capabilities of those who have a lot of it at the top end and what is happening in our societies. I'm going to show you something which in my university would cause me to issue a trigger warning. I think you know what that means. It means you're going to see something in a moment which is deadly serious, although some people might see it in a different way, I don't know. But I want you to think about how you would prepare somebody for what I'm going to describe. This could not have happened 15 years ago. It simply couldn't have happened. It is now in the world of 1.5 billion people. So if I can have that slide, please. All right, so this is the news feed. I see we're off the screen there. Anyway, it's about the social network. It's about Facebook, which has developed algorithms that spot warning signs in users' posts about whether they're going to commit suicide. And as I think many people in the room will know, this is not fiction, this is fact. Somebody, an unfortunate person, had this experience in January. What Facebook have done is to develop an algorithm, an artificial intelligence, no human intervention, which says if people are making these kind of posts, the probability is that they might commit suicide. Which, at first sight, you know, yes, I mean, yes, you would, wouldn't you? Particularly if you were experiencing a legal case. But what do you do when you offer that diagnosis? And how confident are you that somebody who says, I'm worried, I'm unhappy today, or people who are watching it interpret that and say, I think this person's got a problem, can we do something about it? Now this dialogue, which is not mine, this is what the BBC reported, and it goes back to many other news feeds, is to say that the goal is to help at-risk users while they're broadcasting, rather than wait until they complete the video. When someone watching the system clicks the menu option to declare their concern, Facebook displays advice to the viewer about what they can do, where they can go. And it goes on, some might say we should cut their video the moment there's a hint somebody talking of suicide. But we decided not to do that. The experts emphasized that cutting off the stream too early would remove the opportunity for people to reach out and offer support.
Okay.
I'm finding this pretty strange. And then the last sentence there takes you into the international domain, where they say the option is to contact a crisis counsellor and pick up their helplines, but we won't expand this to the rest of the world. We won't expand this to the rest of the world because we don't think they'll be able to cope with the demand. And my question is simply, what kind of education system and experience do we have that prepares our children and our adults and our community to deal with situations like this? It's extremely worrying because the curriculum analogy is that your curriculum is being decided through the use of big data in ways which not only predict behavior, but then begin to seek to determine it.
Okay, thank you very much. Another few questions. The lady that you wanted to ask a question? No? Okay, the gentleman at the back, and then Jon Laglo, and the lady here. And the is that, wow, okay. I'm enjoying seeing faces here. The gentleman at the back. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for very interesting comments. Based on the discussions that we have heard, your comments, do you see fundamentally in the idea of school being different from the way we know it now in future? And if so, then so much of our current endeavors in education research is directed at taking children into school or who is out of school. But should we be really focusing on who is out of learning as opposed to who is out of school, given the way you have conceptualized the future of learning? Thank you.
Thank you, Jon. And then there's a gentleman at the back there. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Stimulating, divergent, and I wonder again, what is it possible for institutions, call them school or not, that are somehow deliberately organized to bring about learning for those who come there? What is it possible for them to do? Because some of the ideas you have, even though they may be about deep learning, are so lofty, so high, so far from the depth that, you know, one doesn't get a sense of what one should concentrate the efforts of institutions for deliberate instruction or teaching or learning, bringing about learning, should concentrate on. It's dangling in the air.
My turn? Okay, and I want to thank all the panelists for your very inspiring presentations. But I assume you all meant K-12 education when you talk about those competencies. So I want to bring to your attention university education in its context, and more precisely, the liberal arts education in the universities. Because I found today, when people talk about liberal arts education, can you hear me? They are still kind of adopting quite traditional approaches. For instance, they might connect liberal arts education curriculum to the classics, and forget to link liberal arts education curriculum to things like globalization. So when they look at liberal arts education, it's more like still the elite type of education, and fail to link to equity and social justice, this kind of thing. So it looks to me there's a gap to look at liberal arts education with the reality of the 21st century. And if that's true, would you like to address this?
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, thank you, Mansetsa, for organizing this panel, and thank you, everyone, for what you've contributed. I wanted to kind of zoom out. You've been zooming in and out, but I'd like to zoom way out. It's estimated by the UN that there'll be 11 billion people on the planet by the end of the century. That means another 3.4 billion people. Right now, it's estimated that we exceed the biodiversity carrying capacity of our planet by about 60%. So, and we have projections, from all kinds of areas, from what's happening to the fish to what's happening to life. And I really appreciated your focus on sustainability. Lewin, I wonder what the implications of this are for the education system that need us. I really believe we have to think a little bit more radically. And I know that, yes, education is very traditional, very hard to change, and yet we kind of face a century going forward that isn't just about jobs, but it's about survival. And I don't think that's too strong a statement. And the question is, how does the education system begin to reflect that at the level of higher education, at the level of secondary, which is largely dysfunctional in terms of the third world, secondary education, because of its problems of access and relevance. And so I pose that to you. We could say more. There's a really interesting book that came out last year by Paul Hanley called 11, and I recommend it. It's 11 billion people on the planet. And obviously the trajectory that we're going doesn't sustain that, or can't sustain it. So that's the big question.
Thank you very much. I think that should be the last question, and I don't see, oh, I'm sorry, I did say that you would ask a question. And after her, I think we should return to the panel and then close. We are almost there, actually.
Thank you. I just started doing a graduate training in Africa over the past 3 or 4 years, and I work in Canada. I was very shocked to find out that a lot of the debate on what we should do about higher education in particular has really been a debate amongst scholars, policymakers, higher education administrators, and the rest of the people I call service providers. I was shocked to find that there was really very little in the literature about what students think. I found that the literature on higher education has very little that actually tells us, what do these students think? It scares me because when I talk to these students in Africa, a lot of the questions that are being posed here is what they are posing, but that's not what they are studying. They're studying practices that have not changed for a long time, but they are hungry for some of the questions that are being posed today. But nobody is asking them, what do you want? How do you want the world to be shaped tomorrow? And I began to realize I needed to do a calibration of the conferences we have had, that in many of them, there is no graduate training workshop. And I think this is the think tank of tomorrow. These are the people who should face these problems. We are talking about the world in all its overwhelming diversity. They are the people who should be studying things about how do you teach people in a village in Malawi. They will have the time and the numbers to do that. We don't. Where do you think that student voice comes into in this debate about tomorrow?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Hank Levin to say the last word, and then we close.
Well, first I want to tell you that either the system isn't very helpful for us up here to hear precisely what you're saying. And I missed a lot of words and things, but I may have a hearing impairment as well, so maybe that's not true for all of us. So in terms of the way I would respond, I would say that to the degree that we've heard questions, they're questions of uncertainty. And that's exactly what we're facing. And it seems to me the real challenge is for us to respond to how we deal with uncertainty, whether we're talking about trying to understand what is likely to happen, trying to understand what will happen if we put our shoulders to the harness and try to move society in different directions, trying to understand how to deal with schools that I've suggested have two important agendas. It's not that one should be denigrated in favor of the other, but both of them are very, very important. And it seems to me that if that's what we get out of this overall discussion, and I've learned a lot and heard a lot of interesting things, that's the benefit, as opposed to after 90 minutes, we've come up with answers. We haven't. But we've come up with, I think, good questions as we were asked to problematize the challenge.
Thank you very much. I think we should give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you.